An explosion is happening right now. The Ukrainian armed forces have launched a counterattack in Donbas. An incredible breakthrough by Ukraine. The Ukrainian armed forces have closed the encirclements. This is the end of Putin's army. It's begun. Putin has already been informed about the incredible events. There are screams and panic in the Kremlin. Shock. Ukraine is taking back Crimea. The peninsula is burning and bases are exploding. Putin is watching as his empire falls apart. This is the turning point of the war. A hellish battle in Kaliningrad. Nato is taking over the city. The countdown has begun. The secret plan is already in motion. Lukashenko has decided on something unexpected. What was unveiled in Belarus has stunned the whole world. Laser weapons are already in service. Putin has devised something terrible. Here we go. You'll be shocked when you hear this. A major blow to Orbán. Hungary was hit from where no one expected. Europe has decided to deal with Budapest. This is a triumph for Ukraine. Everything has turned upside down. All this and more in our upcoming report. Hotspot. In an emergency move, the Ukrainian armed forces have launched a counter-offensive. 2 encirclements for the enemy at once. The Russians were simply ground down. Everyone was expecting this. Putin has already been informed. The Kremlin erupted in shouting. The defeat of the Russian army is imminent. Here's what the enemy's general staff has been hiding. Watch for all the latest news from the front lines.
Ukraine is changing its tactics at the front, which has allowed the armed forces to go on the offensive. 2 encirclements of Russian forces in Donetsk region and the prospect of a cauldron in Sumy region. The Russian Federation tortures its own soldiers who refuse to go on assaults. The main intelligence directorate published an intercepted conversation of the occupier's command, as well as the spectacular destruction of a Russian command post in Donetsk. The enemy's Pokrovsk group has lost its leadership. Everything happening on the front today, watch it right now. The armed forces of Ukraine are changing their tactics. This is reported by a number of military analysts, including former head of foreign intelligence Mykola Malomuz. According to him, thanks to our troops moving out of a purely defensive posture and starting to use flanking strikes, several settlements along the entire front line have already been liberated.
We have now shifted to a model of operations that allows us to both defend specific positions and launch counterattacks to liberate settlements. Yes, the enemy is advancing in certain areas, but for almost a week now, we have been systematically liberating several villages or small towns in this sector. We are delivering counterattacks from the flanks. It is very important that the new tactics have allowed us to act unexpectedly for the enemy. They were unable to concentrate strike groups or establish a defensive line. They are not at all used to systematic defense. That is why the new elements in our operations are allowing us to achieve, for now, sectoral tactical results. But they are sensitive.
First of all, it is worth noting the advance of the Ukrainian armed forces in the Donetsk region, which remains the main direction of the Russian offensive. Despite the enemy grouping of more than 100,000, analysts note that the defense forces managed to liberate a settlement there and at the same time organize 2 encirclements of enemy units.
Ukrainian forces have liberated the village of Pankivka in the Donetsk region, further tightening the encirclement of the remaining Dobropilya salient. According to preliminary reports, Russian soldiers to the north are already surrounded. 2 encirclement rings have formed there, with the infantry inside being supplied by drones from the air.
The fruitless attempts to help their units escape these cauldrons also played into the hands of our soldiers who are fighting in the hottest area of recent months, Pokrovsk. After all, the Russian Federation is today forced to disperse its forces and significantly reduce pressure on the north, outskirts of the city.
Pokrovsk today, it is obvious that for the Russians this was the #1 goal. During this offensive, accordingly, it has not been achieved today, just as, well, probably in general we should talk about the Pokrovsk-Magnograd agglomeration, which has slowed the enemy's advance. Let me remind you that it is mainly the 51st Combined Arms Army of the Russian Federation fighting here, reinforced by a large number of units that have already, among others, arrived. From Sushchina, then they were redeployed to Zaporizhzhia, but they didn't stay there long because it was urgently necessary to provide support. And today they are trying to do just that. Those units that managed to pull off this flash mob in Dobropilya.
At the same time, another support for our fighters in Pokrovsk the day before came from the Air Force, which very successfully attacked a command post in Donetsk. Footage of the Russian headquarters being hit has already spread across the internet.
It's clear that the strikes in this direction were not random. Firstly, in Donetsk, the headquarters and command centers of those very armies and units that are actually fighting in the Pokrovsk direction have indeed gathered. Accordingly, we understand that by leaving these troops leaderless, it will take time to appoint people to these positions, even if only as acting commanders. In any case, this means the chain of command is disrupted.
Meanwhile, the Ukrainian command notes that the Kremlin itself may soon change its tactics, especially in the battles for Pokrovsk. The small assault groups that tried all summer to capture this stronghold did not achieve the desired result. Therefore, Moscow may abandon its strategic ideas in favor of intensifying the usual meat grinder assaults.
Flanking maneuvers, you remember we talked about at least 3 directions. An attempt to bypass, to encircle Pokrovsk, Smirnograd and Konstantinovka, essentially to get almost into the rear and occupy these cities. I think that since the enemy has not achieved its goal, today it will likely try first to deploy mechanized components and possibly even launch a frontal assault.
But there are fewer and fewer Russians willing to launch a frontal assault. The main intelligence directorate reported that the number of deserters in the occupiers' units has increased significantly. At the same time, the Russian command has decided to either execute or torture such soldiers.
Soon, once again, a cunning fighter will join you. But this time, he'll come with his hands raised in surrender. And so it will be with everyone who abandons their comrades. In battle. All of us will leave this place someday, but for those who survive, there will be no mercy.
Analysts also note significant success by the Ukrainian armed forces in the Sumy region, after Russian paratroopers and Marines were withdrawn from there to reinforce the Pokrovsk offensive. The remaining forces simply aren't able to withstand the pressure from the defense forces.
Just east of Tetkino, Ukrainian troops are gradually pushing the enemy back across the state border, that is, to the north. There, the border runs with Russia to the north and Ukraine to the south. Not long ago, the Ukrainian village of Kondratovka was liberated in this area, and now it's Alexevka's turn. The Russians admit that apparently they will lose it. Soon the settlement will be lost, but they still keep clinging to it. Meanwhile, Ukrainian troops have encircled the village and are preventing the Russians from supplying their fighters.
At the same time, experts believe that there may soon be more such operations, especially considering the recent insider information from the United States. For example, the Financial Times reports that the United States will send 33,000 AI-powered drones to Ukraine by the end of the year. According to forecasts, these UAVs will be used in so-called swarms and will be able to coordinate attacks on Russian positions autonomously.
Urgent. Crimea on the brink. Ukraine is taking back the peninsula. It has happened. This is a triumph for the Ukrainian armed forces. Crimea is literally on fire. Ukrainian drones and missiles are wiping the occupiers off the face of the earth and bases are exploding. Don't miss it. This could become a turning point in the war. Who will give Ukraine the strength for a decisive strike on Crimea? Stay tuned.
Crimea in the crosshairs. The temporarily occupied peninsula is at the center of attention for Ukrainian special services. The Ukrainian armed forces have been increasingly harassing the peninsula and successfully inflicting defeats on the enemy. Reports of successful operations by various units are appearing almost every week.
The temporarily occupied Crimean peninsula is turning into a Chornobivka for the Russian occupiers.
At the beginning of the summer, the Security Service of Ukraine struck the Crimean Bridge for the 3rd time. The underwater supports were severely damaged at the seabed level. This was made possible by 1,100 kilograms of explosives. In fact, the bridge was in an emergency condition. And here, Ukrainian armed forces drones paid a visit to the Russian invaders' airbase in Hvadiska, near Simferopol, where they successfully struck 2 enemy Mi-8 helicopters. Their estimated value is up to $30 million. A Russian tugboat was also hit. Russian ships are also in the crosshairs of Ukrainian special services. For example, the main intelligence directorate destroyed a Russian Black Sea Fleet ship near Novorossiysk. The Ukrainian armed forces struck a ship that the Russians had put into service in 2015. Its value is about $60 million.
The Black Sea Fleet has significantly reduced the activity of its naval operations in the expansive Black Sea basin to a historically unprecedented 100-year low. This is one of the clearest confirmations of the success of the operation by the Defense Forces of Ukraine, the main intelligence directorate of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, and the Special Operations Forces, in the destruction of Black Sea Fleet vessels at the moment. Thanks to the successful actions of the Ukrainian Defense Forces and the Ukrainian intelligence community, about 35% of the Black Sea Fleet's vessels have been destroyed.
And here, Special Forces struck a Russian radar system from the S-400 Triumph air defense system. Here is another Yenisei radar from the S-500 system. The destruction or even damage of all these radars leads to the disarmament of Russian air defense in Crimea, which is currently represented by 2 anti-aircraft missile regiments.
On the Crimean Peninsula itself, there is a hunt for Russian air defense systems. And Russia has found itself in a hopeless situation. Crimea is a trap for Russian air defense, which is being systematically and methodically destroyed. This is due to the fact that, firstly, the territory of the Crimean Peninsula is inherently enclosed. It is a closed space. It is impossible to relocate positional areas, to change them like gloves, to move them around 24/7.
Thus, for the shortest period, Russian air defense in Crimea seemed blinded. The enemy cannot quickly replace these systems without withdrawing similar ones from other sites.
Not only does this affect the defense capability of the temporarily occupied peninsula itself, it is also about the fact that it is depleting the entire Russian air defense system. That is, across the territory of the Russian Federation itself, the destruction of air defense systems is not such a systematic and constant phenomenon. But it is specifically in Crimea where this has already become systematic. The destruction of these complexes forces Russia to pull air defense from its mainland territory into Crimea. This is depletion. This is forcing Russia to act as we need so that we can continue to destroy their air defense system.
Over the years of Russian occupation, Crimea has turned into a Russian military base, and attacks by Ukrainian forces are increasingly destroying the aggressor country's military economy and its logistics.
In general, of course, attention will also be paid to the positional areas where various systems are deployed across the temporarily occupied Crimean Peninsula. These include Cape Takankat, Feodosia, airfields, and ultimately numerous military facilities connected with military units and so on and so forth. In other words, there are quite a lot of targets across the peninsula today that should be struck, whether by kamikaze drones, attack drones, or by something more powerful with a more substantial warhead.
Crimea is Ukraine, so the armed forces of Ukraine will continue to strike military facilities and legitimate targets until the Russians leave Crimea and liberate the temporarily occupied territories.
Shock? Missiles are aimed at Europe. Kaliningrad has been turned into Putin's nuclear stronghold. This could be the spark for World War III. NATO already has its finger on the trigger. Who will make the first move? Meanwhile, Ukrainian good drones have blown up Russia. Wild screams in the Kremlin. Watch all the hottest footage and sensational details right now.
The countdown. Russia's war with NATO begins in the Kaliningrad region.
Kaliningrad is undoubtedly one of the most important regions of Russia, our outpost in the west.
The Kremlin is preparing new provocations. The Russian army has moved Iskander missiles to the NATO borders. The alliance has declared its readiness to strike Kaliningrad instantly. The Kaliningrad region is the westernmost region of the Russian Federation and is an exclave, completely separated from the main territory of Russia by other countries. The Russians have effectively turned the Kaliningrad region into a military base. The main formations include ground forces, aviation, as well as the largest naval base of the Baltic Fleet.
The Russian enclave has always been militarized. It is located as a wedge in NATO territory between Poland, Lithuania, the neighboring Baltic Sea, and the close proximity of Belarus, with its recent deployment of tactical nuclear weapons and quite potentially advanced missile launchers, all collectively indicate that Kaliningrad is steadily becoming a particularly special and heavily militarized zone that undeniably poses significant and escalating risks for the entire North Atlantic Alliance.
Kaliningrad very often becomes the center of Russian saber rattling. In this way, Putin is testing the limits of NATO's capabilities. For example, during the joint Zapad 2025 exercises with Belarus, the military practiced combat operations in the territory of the Kaliningrad region, after which the Kremlin deployed Iskander missiles there, posing a threat to 6 alliance countries.
Undoubtedly, this is probing NATO's reaction, testing its capabilities, and checking its response protocols. Undoubtedly, mirror actions are a subject of careful and continual scrutiny from the general staffs of the various opposing military nations and their respective countries.
For Russia, the ongoing confrontation with the powerful North Atlantic Alliance should be clearly understood as the next crucial stage in the current leadership's desperate hold on political power. That is to say, the authoritarian Putin regime. The Putin regime, in its very essence, absolutely cannot exist in conditions of genuine peace. It simply cannot exist in conditions of a fragile truce. As of this very moment, it can exist only in a perpetual state of war.
According to experts, all the provocations by the Russian authorities in the Kaliningrad region currently amount to nothing.
From a military standpoint, Kaliningrad is by no means a knife in the back. It is a vulnerable location. Russia will have to save Kaliningrad instead of Kaliningrad or the Kaliningrad region, serving as some kind of staging ground for a large-scale operation. Most of the military units in the Kaliningrad region are currently empty since their personnel have been sent to Ukraine. Overall, the Kaliningrad region is the Achilles heel of Europe, specifically for the Russian Federation.
Back in July, NATO allies announced the creation of a plan to neutralize the Kaliningrad region, which is intended to counter threats from Russia and ensure global deterrence.
What the military, technical, and defense industrial complexes of NATO countries are doing today, to put it mildly, does not correspond to modern challenges. That's why the question arises, are NATO countries actually ready? For example, to effectively deploy their 50 advanced Leopard tanks there against 2,000 or 3,000 relentless Russian drones per day, this presents a significant challenge. Right now in Ukraine, Russia is using on average about 1,500 drones, FPV drones, per day. Is NATO ready for that? No.
What Putin needs now is to demonstrate NATO's inability to handle such provocative situations. Russia is interested in sowing discord within the alliance. It needs division and the undermining of unity in order to create a serious crisis within NATO.
At this very moment, something has indeed happened in Belarus. Lukashenko is bringing out nuclear weapons, and not just that. This new superweapon shocked the world, but an unexpected detail has come to light. Putin's hellish show has begun, but things are not as they seem. The world is in panic. This is the beginning of a new threat. The whole truth is in the story.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
On the final day of the Zapad 2025 exercises, the Russians and Belarusians decided to amaze the world with their wonder weapon called Saffron. Propaganda media outlets spread the news online, claiming that at the Borisovsky training ground, north of Minsk, they tested a mobile combat laser system capable of destroying small UAVs at a distance of 1 kilometer. All that is known about it are the parameters announced by the presenter, a target engagement time of less than 10 seconds and a crew of 3 people. Back in the summer of 2024, Russians reported that Russia and Belarus had prepared a new combat laser for testing. The Belarusians even produced a report from the LEMT Scientific and Technical Center, which has been developing laser technology since 2023. The designers called their creation the Hyperboloid and showed the first assembled prototype.
The system, developed at the Belarusian enterprise, can operate in conjunction with various radar systems. The Belarusian system is installed in special containers. The laser is deployed on a platform directly at the moment of use and operates in a pulsed mode. This means that the energy flash can only be detected during the active engagement of a target. In addition, the entire complex can be installed not only in special facilities or underground for camouflage purposes, but also deployed on mobile platforms.
In May of this year, a Belarusian public page that publishes information on military-related topics posted these 2 photos. In one photo, there's a falling drone, in the other, the so-called combat laser Saffron. From this, analysts concluded that the system had been tested. And now they've announced it at large-scale exercises that the so-called Union states are conducting near the borders of NATO countries. Ukrainian analysts have already criticized this show, saying that the Russians were flaunting a prototype in front of observers and participants from other countries. Moreover, as with other so-called unparalleled projects, this weapon is most likely a repackaged Chinese solution known as Silent Hunter. What's most interesting is that earlier the Russians did the same thing based on it, only under the name Nomad.
Along with that very same, what's interesting is that the Russians themselves admit it. The laser complex shown in the photo is a Chinese development called the Low Altitude Laser Defending System, or LS. The name Silent Hunter also appears online. This is an improved version of the LS system with a power output of up to 30 kilowatts, available in both stationary and mobile variants, and most likely developed by the China Academy of Engineering Physics.
Recently, the Kvadrat was spotted at Zapad 2025. This is a Russian terminal that is positioned in Moscow as an analog to Starlink. This equipment was used to provide communications for units and elements of the regional troop grouping. There is no information about it in open sources, but visually it resembles the American system. It is known that Kvadrat is designed to transmit large amounts of data at the regimental or divisional level with the capability to use different communication systems, with secure email and video conferencing. In addition to Kvadrat, terminals called Sprint were also used during the exercises. Information about them only surfaced recently, at the end of June, when Russian media reported on deliveries to the 20th Combined Arms Army of the Western Grouping. And of course, aside from the new equipment, the Russians and Belarusians saved maneuvers involving the notorious Oreshnik for the finale of the exercises.
Among the most significant events were activities such as planning and reviewing the use of non-strategic nuclear weapons, as well as the assessment and deployment of the Oreshnik mobile missile complex. Our Russian colleagues have shared their combat experience with us, which allows us to say that our units are now receiving the most up-to-date, most advanced information, which they are integrating into their combat operations both mechanically and automatically.
The Zapad 2025 exercises turned out to be larger in scale than analysts had expected. The armies of Belarus and Russia carried out several maneuvers at once and showcased their own developments. After several years of being an information outcast, Minsk hosted dozens of foreign journalists and delegates. The dictator's armies enjoyed rattling their sabers so much that they promised to do it again in 2 years.
Urgent. A bomb explosion. The Kremlin has Orbán on the hook. Putin has deadly compromat on the Hungarian Prime Minister. This secret has driven him to panic, and Hungary was also put firmly in its place. This is a victory for Ukraine. Orbán did not expect such a blow. The EU has taken a historic step. Watch for all the latest events you might have missed.
It seems there is something more between Orbán and Putin. Some kind of compromat on the Hungarian Prime Minister.
Nevertheless, it is satisfying that we still maintain and develop relations with many European countries. One of these countries is Hungary.
As a result, quarreling with Brussels has long become Viktor Orbán's political style.
We had to dance to Moscow's tune. Brussels plays its own tune too, but we dance as we wish, and if we don't want to, we don't dance at all.
And blocking Ukraine's progress is Hungary's main goal in the European Union. Budapest says no to almost everything, from frozen Russian assets to other forms of assistance. And of course against Ukraine in the EU.
We stopped Ukraine's accession to the European Union. We did this despite strong resistance. We would have instantly found ourselves at war with the Russians. That's why Ukraine's membership in the EU cannot be allowed, because it would bring war to Europe and Hungary.
As a result of the fact that a single vote from Hungary can block everything during voting, EU countries have proposed changing the decision-making process, specifically moving from unanimity to majority voting.
There needs to be a shift from the absolute method of decision-making to majority rule. And I think that at this point, the European Union is moving in that direction. We understand that the bureaucratic machine within the EU does not work as quickly as we would like, but such fundamental reforms often require time, and in addition, political will is needed. It seems there are no issues with the latter, but as always, there isn't enough time.
At one point, the EU even made a decision without Hungary's consent. This was about the frozen Russian assets. Hungary abstained from voting, and Brussels decided to use the money without its approval.
In the context of Russia's full-scale aggression against Ukraine, we have repeatedly seen various tools that the European Union used to bypass Hungary's right of veto. This included political pressure and economic threats.
Nevertheless, a group of members of the European Parliament even called on Brussels to freeze funding for Hungary due to Orbán's failure to comply with EU laws and values.
Of course, the European Union's funding instrument in favor of the Hungarian budget is quite a strong argument for changing Orbán's position. The Hungarian budget and the implementation of government programs largely depend on the subsidies that Budapest receives from Brussels. That is why this mechanism has been used repeatedly, and I think it will continue to be used in the future until political reform is implemented. And important decisions can be made without significant pressure or taking into account the opinion of Orbán himself.
But imagine, up until around 2009, Orbán was a staunchly anti-Russian politician. But after that, something suddenly changed in his position, and he began to play by the Kremlin's rules.
We need to understand that you can't make deals with the Russians, unless it's some kind of encrypted 10-year agreement, from which it won't be clear who they are or what specific economic calculations it's based on. And how will this even affect Hungary's development?
And the reason for all this is supposedly some compromising material Putin has on Orbán, which, as reported, changed his rhetoric. Back in 1990, the Hungarian Prime Minister allegedly received a suitcase full of money from a Russian crime boss, and the handover itself was recorded by a hidden camera. But the issue here might not even be just about that.
Orbán himself is personally and deeply dependent on Russian money, and his current political position is nothing more than a pure and undeniable manifestation of political corruption in favor of a hostile foreign state.
For Orbán himself, personal enrichment is no less important. Through business and connections with Russian oligarchs, he has become the richest person in Hungary, as evidenced by his mansion worth 45 million euros. Since Orbán does not serve the interests of the Hungarian people, nor does he take into account the interests of Europe and Ukraine, it is reported that he may lose power as early as 2026.
We are awaiting the next parliamentary elections in Hungary with cautious optimism, because there is a strong possibility that Orbán will actually lose them. And a party will come to power that is more Eurocentric and at the same time clearly supportive of Ukraine.
For now, however, Orbán remains the gateway through which Putin can influence the European decision-making process. And this, of course, poses a threat both to the peoples of Europe and to Ukraine.
Shock. Explosive news. The US has raised the stakes in the war. For the first time, Washington has approved the delivery of mega weapons to Ukraine. Sensational. Nato is pooling resources to destroy Putin's army. This has never happened before. We'll tell you all the details right now.
The US has approved the first arms deliveries to Ukraine funded by NATO, although just 2 months ago this was only being discussed.
We won't pay anything for this. For us, it will be business. And we will send them Patriot systems, which they desperately need, because Putin has really surprised a lot of people.
According to Reuters, Deputy Head of the Pentagon Elbridge Colby has approved 2 arms shipments to Ukraine, each worth $500 million.
It is quite obvious that in the first 2 packages approved by Elbridge Colby at the Pentagon, the main focus will still be on air defense systems. Judging by the amount, it's abundantly clear that we're not talking about the venerable Patriot missile systems, but rather, quite obviously, about the highly sought-after PAC-3 missiles, which are perpetually in critically short supply and are specifically utilized directly to effectively shoot down incoming Russian ballistic missiles. Additionally, advanced AM-9 missiles may also be supplied to further bolster defensive capabilities.
Nevertheless, Pearl has become a new format for transferring weapons to Ukraine. Allies provide the money and the weapons come from stockpiles, from America.
Recently, the highly respected Financial Times, a leading global business publication, reported on significant and pressing problems concerning the critical supply of vitally important ammunition and advanced missiles specifically designed for the essential air defense systems currently deployed in Ukraine. This concerning situation was primarily explained by a comprehensive and thorough audit of the United States Pentagon's existing military stockpiles, revealing unexpected shortages and logistical challenges. But now it's abundantly clear that a brand new program with sophisticated new algorithms have already been successfully put into place, and this significant development will now certainly help us to receive the absolutely necessary weapons.
NATO allies plan to provide Ukraine with up to $10 billion worth of weapons. But so far, we only have 2 packages totaling $1 billion.
$1 billion is not a truly fantastic amount of money. It's what actually renews. And it's what truly sustains and supports for the long term. It's the necessary critical supplies for us right now, according to a truly new algorithm under a new program.
But what about the timeline? The American side has not yet officially announced the deliveries, so we cannot know the timeline.
We do not have official confirmation from the Pentagon, as we did, for example, with the IRAM missiles, where it was clearly stated who would pay, how they would be procured, and what they would be. There has not yet been such an announcement regarding the next steps.
And although Trump shifted the funding for armaments to Europe, the new aid mechanisms demonstrate positive relations between Kyiv and Washington.
Of course, the delivery timelines for what is needed by the defense forces are insufficient, but nevertheless, this is a working mechanism that shows we currently have a completely healthy development in our relationship with Washington. Yes, it's not without problems. Yes, there are different views on certain aspects of the negotiation track, but nevertheless, when it comes to critical supplies for air defense systems, Washington is providing the necessary minimum that is expected of it.
And finally, how might Moscow respond to this? Washington's approval is both a signal to its allies and a challenge to the Kremlin.
In this case, we understand that the main focus of aggression from the Kremlin is directed at European partners, while attempts are being made to whitewash Trump. The only one who might participate in such an attack, specifically against the 47th President of the United States, is Dmitry Medvedev, who could write a caustic post about it. So there will be some kind of reaction, but it will be very softened so as not to damage the relationship between Putin and Trump.
Meanwhile, the Financial Times also reports that the US will send 33,000 AI-powered drones to Ukraine by the end of the year.
That's all for now. And for more breaking news from the front, tune in to our next episode.